Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Paranormal Karen, funny too. Paranormal Karen, she's so spooky. Oh, and did I mention she's funny too? Yeah, cha-cha-cha.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Welcome to Paranormal Karen. I don't know what I was thinking there. Today, I believe it's July 2nd. Have a happy July 4th this weekend, everybody. One of my favorite guests is back. You all know Dr. Richard Sugg. He has written books on fae, on vampires. Last time it was great. Richard, last time it was great having you on, and it worked two ways. You talked about the where QAnon, like the basis of where these thoughts came from. Remember that?
Sure.
And I did an episode where I interviewed someone from QAnon, and someone got mad at me on YouTube and said, "Why are you giving them time? Why shouldn't you tell us where they came from?" And I was like, "Did it, Richard Sugg, Dr. Richard Sugg." So we got it. Okay. So today you have a new obsession: aliens.
Yes. I've really got onto this subject quite recently. And if you'd asked me a few weeks ago what I thought about it, I'd just have to say, well, look, wasn't it a product of watching too many films, vague photographs, and so on? But there's a spectrum, I suppose, now of strangeness, which I'm trying to accustom myself to. And at one end, there are simply UFOs, which, of course, are getting in the news a lot. Barack Obama, Bill Nelson's files due out, and so on. And the UFOs, I've realized, are the least strange, or if you like, least problematic part of it, because they clearly exist. They've clearly been seen. What they are, where they're coming from, how homogeneous they are in origin, intent, hostility, etc., is hard to say. But the best case, I suppose, really, for just sheer public record, if you like, I would think, especially for Americans, is Arizona. Yeah. 1997, March 1997, we had a tremendous number of Arizonans out in clear skies to see Hale-Bopp Comet, which was due to be a good show that night. And I think it was from about 8:30 till 10, perhaps a bit longer. So dark, but very clear. We've got hundreds, and probably, given that not everybody called in because they were too freaked, probably thousands of witnesses to colossal craft. They're described as up to the size of several football fields put together. The largest estimate is 1 mile. One boy in a car said he believed he could have thrown a stone and hit one of these things. Wow. They were so low. A Little League football game was going on, which was kind of blacked out by this thing hovering over the ground, everyone looking up at it. And yeah, these things, I believe, are quite slow in this case, were visible for a considerable amount of time. And 700 people at least called a woman called Frances Emma Barwood in Arizona, who was a counselor and so had civic responsibility. And I'm paraphrasing a bit from memory, but she said roughly, if you talk about this, you will get chastised, pummeled, harassed, and more or less beaten into the ground, stigmatized and ridiculed. And what didn't help her stigma and ridicule was that the of Arizona at that time, a man called Fife Symington, I believe the third in the American style. Fife Symington held a press conference to lighten things up or calm things down, depending on your preposition. And his press conference featured his 6'4", I think it was chief of police, in handcuffs and a rubber alien suit and mask. We've caught the alien, don't panic. So this didn't help people's attitude of disorientation, bewilderment, fear, or Frances Barwood's stigmatization. What was particularly interesting was that Leslie Kean and a fellow UFO researcher, it's in Leslie Kean's excellent book, UFOs, this case, found that they could get Symington on the record some time later saying, yeah, I saw it. I drove out to Squaw Peak, mountain range, I believe, and I saw it. And he, as a pilot, I believe a US Air Force pilot, previously and still a private pilot, said he'd never seen anything like this made by man. So, yeah, there's many, many others, and, going on for years in some cases in a particular area. Yeah. But the UFOs are the least doubtful part of it turns out.
That is interesting. The Phoenix Lights, and boy, did he get in trouble. That was such a show of lights. People almost thought it was almost like they were being teased by it because it was so obvious and so apparent. And from what I understand, that guy really got in trouble for making fun of that, and because it really frightened a lot of people.
Yeah, I don't want to defend him. I think he should have got in trouble. But I suppose the interesting thing about it is people do not know what to do. And it seems that after the end of the official files, the Blue Book, Project Grudge, and so on, there's been a particular kind of weird silence and hostility to discussion in America, that you've got much better openness, record keeping, and willingness to give sightings because you're going to be treated seriously and not harassed in France, in Belgium, in Russia, Italy, and America, which has had a tremendous number of sightings and certainly accounts, has had a very odd attitude to it, keen feels, for a long time. And it was reports and documents and files from Europe that really started her off as an American journalist researching this that gave her the data she needed.
Yeah, it's So okay, I agree. I think seeing the spaceship, which so many people have, is really the least, like you say, the least problematic. That's exactly the best way to word it. Before you go on, what sparked your interest in this, Richard?
It was really, interestingly, I was reading an excellent book by a guy called Hilary Evans. It's Hilary as a Man, who wrote a book called Seeing Ghosts, a very useful, rigorous book full of detailed case studies about ghosts, how you see them, what it means to see them, circumstances like that. And Evans cites a few UFO and contact cases, including Adamski. And I thought, okay, this looks... know a bit about this, and I can't say I kind of jumped on the thing quickly. I mean, I got interested and I thought there's something going on here, just reading a field guide to UFOs to start with. But actually, I've had days where I thought, no, I can't read about aliens and UFOs anymore. It's making my head hurt too much. But yeah, funnily enough, it was the ghosts, the poltergeists, which I'm doing my next big book on, I hope. And what's interesting is that you'll probably know a very famous American case, John E. Mack, a big professor of psychiatry at Harvard and a Pulitzer Prize winner for his biography of T. Lawrence of Arabia in 1977. And Mack, as a psychiatrist, obviously dealing with traumatized people of various kinds, but presently in, I think, the late 80s, early 90s, is getting more and more people telling him they've been abducted or they're having very strange dreams about abduction. And Mack uses hypnotic regression, which, as I understand, is used responsibly by psychiatrists in all sorts of cases for all sorts of reasons, and successfully. And Mack starts getting more and more detailed accounts of actual abduction, sometimes from out on the road, sometimes in your own house. Tremendous amount of trauma coming out about being examined, tested, fiddled with, clinically treated as though you're not really human by these beings. And Mack ends up, I think it was in 1991, with a 14-month ethics investigation into the, paraphrasing here a bit, but irresponsibility of encouraging delusions, which I think is a kind of standard phrase in psychiatry, to not encourage your patient's delusions. On the other hand, of course, history tells us that until really quite recently, if we look at the whole Me Too, the whole child abuse scandals that have only come out in the last 5 to 10 years in Britain and America, Jimmy Savile being an obvious one, there's a big problem of not listening to people because what they say is impossible, is delusional. So you're in a bit of a tricky knife-edge bind, I guess, as a psychiatrist dealing with these kind of things. if you're not listening to people who have real traumas, and the main problem they have in society is not being listened to, or being listened to with great derision.
Yeah, the other thing I always noticed, this is so it's interesting how everything has turned around, because now in America they're yelling abolish the police and this and that and all these things that are going against police officers. But for years, that was like the standard evidence that you saw a UFO was like, hey, the police officer saw it. And granted, I know it wasn't as much about authority as police officers are not going out on a limb. Hey, the pilots saw it. Like those were the two groups that really could solidify that something happened. Those were the true, most trusted groups. But now I think it is changing. And it is a funny thing about that he was looking at delusions. It's amazing. It's almost like reincarnation, where there's so many cases. You wonder I guess they have to do that. Have to rule out delusional first, right?
Yeah, I mean, Mac didn't believe they were delusional. His attitude to it is slightly ambiguous, but if anything, he's being accused of encouraging their delusions. They're seen as delusions by the people at Harvard who catalyzed this investigation, which I guess took over his life pretty much for 14 months. He was completely cleared, I should state. He was completely cleared and free to work on without any kind of blemish on his record. But if you look at coverage, I've just looked at the New York Times so far, he can get some pretty ropey press. There was a pretty dubious TV documentary featuring his cases not long after. And yeah, what I found really was that I got a very strange variety of reactions in a university setting, Durham University at that time, when I started asking people about ghosts and poltergeists. I, on the one hand, had two colleagues I've known for 7 and 12 years, telling me about their own poltergeist cases. And in one case, the person had been severely traumatized for about 18 months by this. And I had numerous students telling me very convincing cases, again, students of kind of every type, really, the most hard-headed rugby-playing character who went on to be a barrister. In fact, had two poltergeist cases, one in his historic family and one in his own teenage years. One of them, in fact, was a student who said they'd been in a haunted house in America when some children's toys flew across an upstairs room, and everybody, including this girl, bolted out of the house, right out of the house and in the room. Now, one of those people was, in fact, she was a woman and a US Air Force pilot who didn't spook easily. But yeah, I got, at times really nervy, embarrassed, hostile reactions to trying to discuss this, despite the slightly surreal fact that several of my students had experienced it and several of my colleagues. So it really focused to me what's come through now with this whole thing with Mac and with the taboos still lingering on a bit around UFOs. At university, of all places, if you can't study some of the most important questions in our world and indeed cosmos, what are you supposed to be doing?
Well, that's the whole thing with science and even medicine right now is, boy, you're not allowed to ask a question. You get in trouble, you ask a question, and that's what it should be, as asking questions. So, all right. So he, that's great that he got cleared. Did you ever read about the Travis Walton case?
Yes, funnily enough, that was one I've got listed down, which, I understand he was seen being knocked down and abducted by 6 witnesses who perhaps understandably, if not very bravely, ran away. And what's striking about Walton, apart from the examination thing and very detailed descriptions of the people who take him, is that he lost, I believe, 5 days. 5 days in this case, because the missing time is a big factor, seen over and over again. But Walton's supposed to have lost 5 days during what you would imagine, be a 2-hour or 3-hour examination. And I believe took lie detector polygraph tests later. People talked to his neighbours, his priest and so forth, and found him very, very plausible Very,
Yeah.
very straightforward and truthful.
I saw him speak once, and what's really interesting was he talked about the follow up. In fact, I have to reach out and try and get him on the podcast because he's a very nice man, but he had some of the most interesting pieces of the follow-up, which you hit on the first part, which was, and this is how, actually, I'm going to bring this back up at the end because I'm going to bring this up in the last half because I bet we're going to hit on a lot of things that actually were interesting when he spoke about the aftermath. So, yes. Okay. So continue.
Yeah, so Wilson's a great one. And the missing time, hopefully we'll talk about a little bit. One I'd just like to bring up because I don't think it's hugely well known and because it's extraordinary in every way, and not least because it occurred in June 1920, when you don't expect people to have the expectation to see UFOs, the kind of fantasy archetypes or whatever it might be, with most of these cases supposedly dating from the 40s after the war. And this was a character in his teens at the time called Albert Coe, who was fishing and canoeing in Canada with a friend, some quite remote areas, when he heard someone crying out and found a young man, human-looking to all intents, trapped in a crevice between some rocks. And quite resourceful, he got a knife, a rope, he was carried around, cut down a sapling, used a sapling, the rope as a leverage, and some difficulty, but in the end got this guy free. And he was very cold from being stuck in water for some time. He cuts on his leg, but he kind of bounced back quite quickly and was trying to just, get away and saying he'd got a plane that his father had lent him, and it was parked a little way off. He was going to get away on his plane, and thanks very much. He was very, very grateful, and there's very sort of human gratitude towards Coe. However, he really just couldn't walk, so reluctantly he had to be helped by Coe, his arm over his shoulder, to get back to his craft. And he now starts kind of changing his story and explaining that, well, it's a very special research plane that my father lent me, so look, please don't talk about this because I'd be in big trouble with my father and so on. So Coe, this is in June 1920, comes into a clearing about 100 foot wide and sees a flying saucer. And he gives particularly a very precise description. If I can find it, I might just read you that actual description of the takeoff because it's one of the most convincing things. You've got a moment.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I can pause if you need to find it. Here we go. Okay, found it. There you go.
That's great. So Coe has just helped his friend, who is called, I'll explain this, but Zret, X-R-E-T, into the craft. And he says, right, thanks very much. I won't forget you. Stand well back when I take off. Now, here we go. I was musing over its lack of windows or portholes and wondered how he could see out unless they're on the other side. Just then, the perimeter edge began to revolve. Now, this revolving, and a lot of the time, one half of a craft revolving in one direction, the other half revolving in another, is a very consistent technical description over and over again of craft taking off. At first, it gave off a low whistling sound, picked up speed, mounting to a high-pitched whine, finally going above the audible capabilities of the ear. At that time, I experienced a throbbing sensation, which was felt rather than heard. It seemed to compress me within myself. It doesn't sound like the kind of thing you're going to make up, especially as a teenager. As it lifted a few feet above the ground, it paused with a slight fluttering. The legs folded into the recesses as it swiftly rose with the effortless ease of thistledown, caught in an updraft of air, and was gone.
Wow, that is actually for the 1920s. It was 1920, right?
It is 1920, yeah.
That is, it's not somebody that's been reading, well, he wasn't out that much. How brave of him to say it at that time, too.
No, and the slight fluttering, he doesn't give enough, I think, to let us really know, but it sounds slightly like what's reported over and over and over again, that the craft comes down or goes up like a leaf rocking. Is a kind of rocking preparatory motion from side to side. It moves slowly, And when it's going up, it'll do that for, I don't know, 100, 200 feet, and then it will shoot off at incredible speed.
Interesting.
So,
let's take a break right here, and then I have a question about that. Hold on one second, folks. Hey, everybody, just a quick update. I will not be at Tin Pan Alley in Cape Cod, at least not in the beginning of June. So keep your fingers crossed that I can change that announcement, or maybe even next year you'll see me there. But right now, that date has been postponed. I am restarting my psychic stand-up show at Flappers the 4th Thursday of every month, which is very exciting. And also, if you're in the LA area, you can see me headlining there July 24th. I'll keep you updated on that. Other than that, you can go to my website, karenrontowski.com or paranormalkaren.com, and book a reading or check out my videos. And hey, don't be afraid to drop me an email. I love to hear from you guys. Maybe suggest a guest, maybe tell me your favorite guest, maybe tell me to shut up. Either way, karenrontowski.com. Let's get back to the podcast. Okay, Richard, weird question. Who did he report this to? This feels like you're right, this feels like a one-off. Like, who did he report this to, or how was this found today?
Right. So the source for this, and I think it's my favorite author on the whole subject, is Timothy Good. And this is Alien Base, which I think is one of his best books on the subject. Now, just to give you a little bit more in the picture here, who did you report this to? Well, he was told not to report it to anybody. And if this account is correct, he had engagement and meetings with Dret, which is a short form of Mr. X spelled backwards, for 6 decades, for a very, very long time. And he met him, I gather, on average 10 to 12 times a year. The first follow-up after the very kind of effusive gratitude, I won't forget you, took his name and address so that he could, properly thank him. The first follow-up was Albert with his friend camping, canoeing and fishing, sitting by the fire one night. I know it's a few days later, but it's a 2-week trip. And they see the saucer in the sky, and they don't just see it, but in fact, as Albert says, it bobs side to side in what he thinks is an unmistakable hello gesture. And presently, they have a meeting in a hotel in, I think it's Canada again, but that's December the same year, and then meet 10 to 12 times a year for the following 6 decades. Now, I'll just give you what he is told over time by Mr. X in brief form, and this is where it gets mind-bending. And Timothy Good, who I think is very balanced, very skeptical where he needs to be, finds it hard to swallow some of this, as do I. But I said I'd go through the extremes from the matter of public record in Arizona or Belgium or Hudson Valley for that matter, to the really crazy stuff. And this is the crazy stuff. They come, or he comes, Mr. X, from a place called Norca, and the Norcans had an early contact with Cro-Magnon man successfully on Earth. Their planet Norca presently started to dehydrate slowly but inexorably. They left, I think it was, trying to remember how many of them, quite a lot left in quite a lot of craft with animals, insects and plants. And this, again, I find slightly more convincing, was that almost all the craft, I think all but one, was sucked into the sun.
Oh. That's not funny, but it's like interesting.
Was sucked into the sun. So it goes against, and quite a lot of other details in other accounts go against this kind of super infallibility and absolutely kind of, space age slickness, if you like, of extraterrestrials.
Yeah, you lean too far to the left, you get sucked into the sun. They learn as they go, like we do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, think of Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. It's like taking a moped around Hyde Park Corner. So you've got one craft left, and allegedly this comes down on Mars. They spend 900 years on Mars. They managed to adapt. They also spend some time on Venus. And good quotes Carl Sagan, who said that if you were to introduce certain type of algae on Venus, it might actually be reasonably hospitable. I know that it's very, very inhospitable to human life in other ways. And yeah, they established a base in Auckland on Earth. And here's something that does ring true, if anything does, because this is coming through over and over again, particularly from the 1940s onwards. They're very concerned about the destructive habits of humankind. And they're concerned about what they've seen in World War I. Of course, it looks tame stuff now, perhaps to the atomic capabilities, but obviously machine guns or something else when you were sending them against the cavalry in World War I. So they'd seen all this technology, a huge amount of effort going into just mowing people down in their hundreds and thousands in France, Germany and Belgium. And then, of course, the atom. It's the early stages, but the early stuff is going on, Heisenberg and co. And they were very concerned about all of this. And this comes through over and over again. And Keen's argument is that, if people have made contact, the stories of contact and discussion are true, or even just some of the actual UFOs coming down over nuclear bases, all the lids of silos coming open with no explanation in America, for example, even if those are true, it indicates, as does the date pattern from the 40s on, a very serious concern with Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and of course nuclear testing, and not just the sense that humanity is going to blow itself to bits, but that it is going to screw up its environment and it's going to affect surrounding cosmos in the process. So it's partly altruistic, it's partly pragmatic, and you certainly see one or two contacts telling humans about the incredible diversity of Earth, the biodiversity and things that other species need and can only get here.
That is it's very interesting. There was a man that had a near-death experience that had a conversation with God. Again, I'm just paraphrasing something here, but I'll never forget this because it came out in 1985, and he was worried about nuclear war then, and he said, God said to him, I will never let it happen. And I did not know exactly what you were just saying until about a year ago, where someone said, they are hovering over our nuclear sites, sometimes shutting them down and then bringing them back up just to show we're watching you, or you're not, this is not, you know what I mean? Like, we can overpower this if you're going to start that. I find that so fascinating, but also I find it kind of comforting.
Yes. I think, my sense has been there's a huge spectrum of types of aliens that have been reported, from really kind of primitively, sort of almost caveman hostile at times, through to angelic, healing, highly spiritual, intensely spiritual experience, the most of somebody's life in perhaps just a few minutes. And certainly the power to control not just technology, but time and again, people's will is overridden, and they do something. They don't know why they do it. Some ways, my favorite case is a Spanish hunter. Well, he's a businessman, but he goes hunting with his dog and his gun. He's got an English pointer called Moose, M-U-S. And he suddenly feels compelled to go in a different direction to his normal hunting trip. He has a drink in a bar, which shouldn't even be open at 3 a.m. And he gets picked up presently by this craft. And the kind of unforgettable and always convincing image is of the dog sniffing everything on the spaceship, and him having to carry it up a ladder at one point as they move around the craft. But his will being overtaken, him doing this, he doesn't know why, just feels that he must do it. You see this a lot happening. Extremes of danger, I suppose, in terms of types. There was a case in 1978, you may know it's quite famous, and a character called Fred Valentich in Australia was a private pilot, had hired, I think it was a Cessna jet for a flight. And there is a compelling and pretty chilling transcription in Keen's book about the conversation with him and air traffic control. Something is hovering over him. Something is playing with him. It appears, it disappears, it comes back again from the southwest. And I think it's about 12 minutes, I'm not sure, but toward the end of this conversation, you have got him and air traffic control fairly bewildered, of course, and Valentich, whose voice is sounding very stressed on the tapes, as I understand it, suddenly saying, "It's hovering above me and it's not an aircraft." And then he goes dead. That is the last you ever hear from him. And it's in fact the last you ever see of him. And I gather his plane, which is a bit of a tough one to explain. But there is possibly a theory what happened to it. The very last bit, I think, on the transcription is a pause for 17 seconds when air traffic control is trying to talk to him and has lost him, during which a very strange, metallic-sounding pulsed noise is audible with no discernible pattern in time or frequency. Delta Sierra Juliet Melbourne, and that's it. Where did he go? Well, there's reports of a large UFO in, I think it was America, it could have been South America, where jets were circling around the craft. These looked like human Earth jets, but disappeared inside it. So is that what happened to Valentich? I mean, it's as good an explanation as any, I suppose, for something that simply wasn't found. Okay, it might have gone down in the ocean, but nowadays it's a bit odd not to be able to find any trace at all.
Yeah, that's, that is interesting. In fact, I did a whole podcast on that Malaysian flight that went down. And basically that guy took that plane to a place where it would, where it was so deep that they would find, they found very few parts of it. Intentionally. But yeah, I know this is sort of a weird tag on here, but this sort of interdimensional disappearing, which it sounds like, which is what I feel like that is. It's sort of, if it didn't go down in the ocean, sort of going through another dimension. It just is starting to remind me of the missing 411 cases out here in the national parks where people are turn your head and someone's gone and they're in another space. It's very pretty extreme. I haven't heard that case. That's fascinating.
No, well, thanks for bringing up the interdimensional thing, because that's, a whole other dimensions. And that is considered by good. And it features perhaps in a case which I think Jenny Randall cites. And Jenny Randall's book is Time Storms. It's particularly to do with time slips, lost time, and so on. But, of course, lost time comes up in a lot of these UFO cases. And she cites a training exercise of soldiers in the night in, I think it's 76 in Chile, very high up on the mountain. And there's 5 of them maybe, and one commanding officer. They see some strange lights a little way away. And the commanding officer wonders if it's part of the training exercise. Well, let's go and investigate. He goes off on his own and he disappears. Some hours later, I think it's around dawn, Vasquez, I think his name is, turns up again, and he's in a very bad state. His coordination is utterly shot. He's got very bad memory problems. I think his brain, his head is in no good state. But what's most striking of all in this case, if we recall that Travis Walton lost 5 days, this being the upper limit that I've heard in these cases, often just 90 minutes or something, he had apparently several days' growth of beard when he returned a few hours later. And he also had a watch with a date function that indicated that he'd been missing for 5 days. Now, that's all we've got on that as far as I know, but it was checked out by, I think, the CIA, and they found Vasquez very plausible. So, if the guy just disappears, then another dimension is as good an explanation as anything, especially if he somehow loses 5 days in, 4 or 5 hours.
Yeah, that's the crazy part. With the U.S., they're releasing I guess it was 2 days ago, because today is June 17th. This is coming out July 2nd. The U.S. decided to release what they had. I think they're releasing a lot of nothing.
Right.
I think it's not. I don't think they're really releasing what they had. I think they're releasing enough to say this is real. That's it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'll give on that note while I'm on the subject in my head, the most extreme arguments and theories, possibilities that Timothy Good puts forward, which might explain a bit of a smokescreen or silence. And this is that alien bases have been established on Earth for quite some time. Puerto Rico, Australia, and several locations around the world, allegedly some cases under lakes or oceans, and pretty eerily precise descriptions of an alien craft leaving the ocean, going into it, and seeming to kind of repel the water so that it's in a free column as it leaves or enters the water. These would explain perhaps if there's some kind of alien liaison, type of one of Good's books, going on between America and other powers and extraterrestrial civilizations for the benefit of technology. Do they want something that's on Earth in terms of water, power sources, vegetation, who knows? And one particularly kind of eerie argument has been that the Roswell crash, about which there seem to be a lot of pretty convincing details in terms of witnesses, bodies, and material, this weirdly foil-like material that you couldn't damage with a sledgehammer, just stuff that really didn't seem to be of this earth in the wreckage. One argument has been that from that time on, the technology that was discovered by American scientists was just seeded invisibly into the scientific environment, and it led to fiber optic cables, for example, and much else over following decades. So I don't have a definite opinion on that. It's a lot to take in, but that's the extreme case of the situation. Certainly, Albert Coe's contact, Mr. X, stated that yes, they had an established Earth base, and they'd had one for some time. Sometimes you get a description of a mountain opening in the Andes, for example, and something coming out of it or going into it. So
interesting.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny because they really have slipped a little of it in every movie out there. You know what I mean? Like at War of the Worlds was with Tom Cruise. They were coming from inside the Earth. That's really fascinating. I hadn't examined that too much. I just was listening to something the other day where the person said, because I always go, I'm all over the map with, people, channelers and stuff like this on this program. And someone just said, well, Earth is the one that everyone watches. Like, you guys are the best reality show. like we're the cute puppy show that all the aliens like to watch. But it is very interesting that, even the water on Mars, even that's the big deal that, to everyone listening, why is that so interesting? But maybe water is really the reason they're all, some of the reason they're all interested in coming here.
Water seems to be a big recurrent one. Yeah, I mean, I like the idea of the reality show. There's a favourite British singer of mine called Momus who has a line in a song, God is a tender pervert and the angels are voyeurs. And really human life is just a terrible black comedy to entertain them as they hold the cushion in front of their eyes. Water, and certainly in terms of the power situation, the flight situation, obviously, this is a big one for anybody, and it was for me for a long time. How on earth are they getting here? You can buy their existence, but how do they get here when you're talking about light years and so on? Well, There's an argument for them using space-time in a very strange way. But certainly if you just go on the nuts and bolts of accounts of the craft, they travel at incredible speed. And I'll give you in a second a famous British case. It's probably the most famous British encounter of all from 1980. They travel at incredible speed, but they defy inertia. They can stop, bang, dead in midair. They can execute right-angled turns. These are being watched by professional pilots, military and airline pilots who just say that that's not possible. And yeah, they seem to have overcome gravity, overcome inertia. They break the speed of sound. There's no noise. Almost all the time, there's no noise except perhaps the whining, humming, buzzing, but very, very little. And if somebody's on a craft, allegedly, and they take off and suddenly realize they've traveled, hundreds of miles in a couple of seconds, they feel nothing. They feel nothing. They seem to be in a kind of bubble, somehow, where the effects on the body are completely nullified somehow. But yeah, if I can just touch on the one which gives that speed quality very memorably, and it is probably the most famous British case. Rendlesham Forest, which, by the way, if anyone wants free manure, I often see a sign in the countryside when I go cycling saying free manure. If you can't get out to the Welsh countryside with free manure, just go on Wikipedia and look up the Rendlesham Forest incident, because you could use that as free manure. It's actually steaming garbage. It's not a good one to try and get information on, as a lot of poltergeist cases. But no, I mean, very high-ranking and serious people saw this not once but twice in Rendlesham Forest, which was at the time, in 1980, a joint US and UK base in Suffolk. It was just after Christmas had finished, so the very early hours of Boxing Day, 26th December 1980, that strange lights were seen, and there was a very bright light which indicated a crash. So 3 military police were sent out. A young man called Jim Peniston, 25, gives the best account I've seen. He's in the company of the craft on the ground. I think it's about 9 foot wide, 7 foot high. It's on 3 legs, which later left indentations in the ground. And yeah, he's in the company of it for like 20 minutes, 30 minutes. He waits a while. Does it look hostile? Is it dangerous? Doesn't look like it. He goes up to it. He touches it. It's warm. It's smooth like glass, but feels like metal. It's got hieroglyphic symbols etched into it, which he draws, which have been reported in other cases. And it seems to have a kind of shimmering, unstable light field, which suggests electricity. The hairs on people's arms, bodies are prickling up as they're near it. And he sees it take off, and you can see his notes from the time where it says speed impossible underlined. And a couple of nights later, it comes back. A guy called Holt, I think's more senior, comes out, interrupts his dinner to take a party out. And this one is interesting. We don't get quite enough, I don't think, to be sure. But Holt, who, what you say about the police, good police, bad police, I think all of them, when, their self-interest isn't at stake, they are trained to be observers. And it's a very cracking British poltergeist case by a policewoman, Caroline Mitchell, with police witnesses. And as a military man, Holt, he's not given to flights of fancy, I don't think, but he describes a light, he says, which is almost like an eye blinking at them. They have it in some kind of binoculars or sight vision, and it's very, very bright, and it's almost like an eye blinking at them. It's red, it's yellow. It explodes presently into several lights, and a light high above sends down a beam, a very thin directed beam, which looks like it means something because it hits the ground about 10 feet away from them. The eye blinking at them, this could just be me drawing parallels where there are none, but there is in the Field Guide to UFOs a very strange case of a light, a UFO, which is seen and looks weirdly organic. That's the quickest, simplest way to describe it. But it doesn't look like it's an alien-built craft. It looks like you're dealing with a whole other order of something. What? We haven't got the words or the concepts for it, but it behaves, it moves in a way that seems like it's kind of an animal, actually.
Wow.
In the sky, but not in any sense a bird or anything like that. So, yeah, that's Rendlesham Forest, which I think is worth stressing, actually, the point about Wikipedia. As you say, you're not allowed to ask questions. There's a really lamentable kind of bog standard pseudo-skeptic bunch who've taken over Wikipedia for every entry you get on a scientist like Hal Puthoff, a psychic healer like Matthew Manning, poltergeist cases with whole amazing books written about them. The Wikipedia case is just absolute garbage. I mean, it makes you realize that you should not have unattributed encyclopedia articles. There should be a name. So what happens in an academic encyclopedia? You have somebody's name. What is their agenda? Who are they? Because otherwise, it's trolling and it's libel, in my opinion, in a lot of cases.
Yes,
you look at the entry
Wikipedia and Snopes have. They're both. I don't trust either of them. I'm getting to not trust anything, especially the way things are going. But yeah, it's a very interesting. There is an agenda there. It doesn't matter who gets there and does it first. But yeah, let's take a break, and then I want to hit another interdimensional story, and then Travis Walton. Okay, folks, we'll be right back.
Psychic teas, spelled with a Z, are scrumptious herbal combinations with antiviral and anti-inflammatory properties. Without sugar or caffeine, psychic teas won't mess with any medications and are designed by a naturopathic doctor. Many testify to positive results. Detox chakras and psychic tea blends enable bodily functions with superior efficacy, while more love and champagne blends support awareness of subtle joy and bliss. The CBD's teas are magical with myriad healing effects. There are 20 servings per package. A little dab'll do ya, and you can drink it hot or cold. Psychic teas taste so good. Replace coffee, use as a bedtime ritual, or even flavor a meal or dessert. The people behind the product are righteous and kind. Psychic teas will blow your mind. Totally worth the investment. Psychic Teas with a Z.com.
All right, so a couple of things. This is something I find, on the Skinwalker Ranch. There's a fantastic book that was written by, I don't know if it was George Knapp, but there's a great book written about the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. And they say, these guys, they were actually paid to be there for a while to investigate what was going on. And one guy had on the night vision glasses, and where with the naked eye, these others were seeing a light, like a flashing light or something they couldn't explain. With the night vision glasses, this guy saw a tunnel that things were coming in and out of. Like, it was almost like the night vision kind of gave him that okay to see the interdimensional. He was like, something's coming out of the tunnel. So that's very interesting. Also, that we might have the capabilities to see that. But so I saw Travis Walton speak. I can't remember if it was Gettysburg, but he talked about a couple of details about being when people are abducted. The one thing is they always say they have the telepathy. They have the instant telepathy. They know what the aliens are having a conversation in their mind. So when he was abducted, like you said, they picked him up and threw him. He was thrown like 30 feet in the air. He wakes up on the craft, and he said he couldn't communicate with them. He said they were just staring at him like they were. It was so odd how they were staring at him. Well, what happened? And then they left and they came back, sort of looking humanoid or like humans, and spoke to him. But one of the things that happened, that case became so huge because they really thought the other 6 guys murdered him. So that was sort of you guys didn't get along. That's where it got so big, where people got involved. And so his brother got bombarded with these calls. He talks about how great his brother was, that his brother saved his life. So his brother was getting this mysterious calls from people that said, if you find him, do not turn him over to authorities or the hospital. You want to take him here. And they told him a place to take Travis. They took him to a doctor that dealt with people that had been abducted, a very special doctor. And it proved to have so much evidence in that the doctor knew exactly how to test him and what to do. And one of the things the doctor found out was when they picked him up and threw him, which seemed like an error, he had a concussion, and the part of his brain that would have been connected to telepathy was injured from the concussion. So he couldn't communicate with them telepathically like everybody else. The doctor also found because how high he went, we would have all kinds of broken bones. He found the one dot where, however the aliens healed him, that's where the needle went in or whatever was happening there. There were a couple of other things in there that he talked about that were just fascinating, seeing it from another perspective, because I don't think that spaceship meant to abduct anyone. He got in the light or what was going on. It was like you said, it was an error. There was an error here. But he went back. Now that he went back, I couldn't make it, but he went back. I think it was 10 years later, or maybe it was 20 years later. I can't remember. But all the area where the spaceship had been, there's double the growth. The trees have grown faster. It's almost like that one area of the radiation or whatever was in that spaceship just the plant life just went crazy. I got to find him. He's pretty accessible. You'd probably have an excellent interview with him.
Please let me know, because I'd love to listen to that. Yeah. Certainly in terms of the lost time and the abduction scenario and the regression, there's an intriguing pattern of possible connections. Jenny Randall's time storm cases, you don't tend to see anything that looks like a classic UFO. But there was a character called Paul in 1973 in the Midlands in England who was coming home late from a dance, driving his car. And because he knew he had quite a long drive, he hadn't drunk very much at all. He found something odd happening, and next thing he knows, he's on foot, soaking wet, 16 miles from where he last remembered driving the car. His car's nowhere to be seen, and he's also lost hours. I think it was 4 hours or more, but it's several hours. He gets a friend to drive him back along his route the next day, and he finds his car in a field. The gate to the field is locked. Typical British farm gate. It's about 6 foot long, about 3 foot high, and you're not going to jump a car over it. But it's a muddy field. It's been raining, which is why he's wet, and there's no tire tracks in the field. The car's just there. Mm-hmm. So if craft can track the beam up cattle or elk, as has been alleged, can they do it with a car? I don't know. I think with this, we're in, perhaps in that interdimensional lights in a tunnel, who knows, area. But what he remembers, he gets a jog later on, and he remembers just this misty fog just before everything goes blank. And this is echoed time and again all over the world by people having very odd experiences, often electrical cutouts of the car engine and radio and so forth while driving. And I should say, if anyone reads Mac's book, and given the problems Mac had as a psychiatrist with abduction experiences, it does make your head hurt. It leaves you kind of with nothing to grasp onto a lot of the time. But he's got a wide range of people having this happen, and they lose time over and over again. They've lost time wherever they've been abducted from. And there was a case in Australia in 1993, recorded by Good, not Mac, and a woman called Kelly Cahill with her boyfriend was driving back from seeing friends quite late at night, and something went a bit odd with the car. It suddenly slowed down to almost no speed. Just after they'd seen what looked like a UFO inhabited, they were confronted by a blinding white light. Wanted to just try and drive past it in the middle of the road, but then found they'd lost about an hour and a half. The car smells oddly of vomit. They can't find any, but it smells of it. She's got a pain in her abdomen going up to her shoulders. She presently gets a very peculiar kind of triangular scar on her stomach. She gets a lot of very bad menstrual bleeding out of sequence. Yeah, for 3 months. And she decides to seek help about this. The scar, you jogged me on this because you're talking about it, over and over again, little needle marks, all sorts of types of scarring and so forth are actually on people's bodies. She doesn't get things until she goes into some hypnotic regression, and then she's starting to get stuff coming back, including really compelling detail, which is a red dragon. There's a red dragon when there's another car parked. Presently, somebody writes into the newspaper, yeah, we were on that road. Yeah, it happened to us. There seem to be 3 cars involved in all. And she sees this red dragon kind of floating past her vision in memory of the incident. And somebody else who writes in says, yeah, we had a very strange design on our spare tire cover as a red dragon. We've never seen a tire cover like it. So, yeah, this seems to check out. She is an interesting one because Kelly has a lot of aftermath from this, gets electric shocks. She has the TV start up in the middle of the night. She has a video recorder spit tapes out. A lot of basically poltergeist stuff happens around her, which is a small handful, but it's enough to make you sit up. That it's happened in France. It's happened with other abductees. And, why is this happening? Has something happened to the kind of electromagnetic field of a person? I don't know. But she has several intrusions in the bedroom, allegedly, from what would traditionally seem to be sleep paralysis nightmare figures. Very tall, hooded figure, sucking energy out of her. And this takes me back to when I got my head around poltergeist, because I was studying sleep paralysis and nightmares, and your holy trio, your unholy trinity across history of the sleep paralysis figure is the witch, the vampire, or the alien abductor. And it took me a long time to realize that actually this isn't just cultural construction, perhaps, that this is really happening. Kelly comes up as a compelling case. And there are, we're talking about the police. There's a policeman called Shermer in, I think, America, who only remembers what happened to his lost time in this strange incident after hypnosis. There's soldiers on Madagascar who lose 3 hours and get into a lot of trouble for not checking in on the radio. So, it's every type of person has got this story somewhere.
I think I told this story. Apologies to my podcast listeners if I've already told this story here. But I had a very strange time slip incident with a friend of mine where we were on our way to Yuma. I picked her up, and it's a route I knew all the time. LA to San Diego, take a left on the 8, go all the way out to Yuma. I had done it many times. I stopped by, picked her up. We went to a gas station, got gas, got the receipt. Okay. We're driving, never passed the landmarks that I know by heart because I lived there for a number of years. I knew every street on the 5, or San Diego, or the SeaWorld Drive, all of them. And we look down, we're driving, and the CD in the car starts to skip. And we both look down and go to touch it. In fact, we laughed like, we both reached at it at once. We look up. I see a wall on the side of the road that I was like, what is that? Did they just put that up? And I said, I don't understand. I don't ever remember this being on the 5. And she looks, we pass a sign, and she says, oh my God, we're in Tijuana. So now we're in Mexico. So
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And she says, pull off. So we pull off. She calls her husband, like, we don't know what happened. Literally took us 5 hours to get out of Mexico because of the traffic. I walked into we made it to Yuma. I walked into the gig like 1 minute on. We looked at the clock on the receipt, on the gas receipt, and the time that she called her husband. And if we had been trying to get to Tijuana, there was no time. There's no way we would have made it in that time. Number one. Number two, you can't just drive into Mexico without going through something or going through
border check.
Yeah. We didn't have the border check. It was one of the strangest. I still don't know how that happened. I know she was a medium, and she would always say, my horoscope is pretty paranormal. She was always like, whenever I'm with you, something weird happens. But it was that, I'll never forget that. And we called all our friends. In fact, we called the guy that was a border guard, and he was like, I don't know how you got in. And they said that there had been tales of this happening on the 5. And then what was even more strange was, I don't know if he was going the same way, but later there was a big case of a Marine who had a whole bunch of guns in the back of his car, and he was going to a shooting range or something. He ends up in Mexico, and he ended up in jail. But when he got to the place where he was supposed to, not going in, I think coming out, he said, listen, I got to tell you, there's a whole bunch of guns in the trunk. I came off the road. I don't know how I got here. And it was a big case here because he ended up in jail, and they couldn't get him out of the Mexican jail. And so there's a weird, so that's my story on that. It doesn't make any sense.
No, that's a good one. But it makes me glad that I don't drive. I don't know if it happens to cyclists. I don't know if cyclists are immune to it, but then you tend not to cycle at night if you can help it. It's far too many of these stories, and very weird physical effects. The Oz factor, this kind of strange lack of all ambient noise comes over people in these cases, even down to
ignore that other phone. That's my business phone. It shouldn't be ringing right now, but it is. So maybe it's the aliens. If you're hearing a ringing in the background, sorry to interrupt you there.
That's okay. Yeah.
Here, I'll pause for
the potential overlap again between these UFOs and poltergeists, and it's a place in Italy, very remote little hamlet in Sicily. Called Caneto di Caronia. And in 2003, I think it was winter, so 2003 to 4, they started getting unexplained fires, and just weird fires, a mattress, a set of wedding presents, a television, and they seemed to behave in the way that poltergeist fires do. They didn't erupt in an obvious way for any reason. It had sort of radiation quality about them. Mobile phones went very weird at the same time. And the locks of car doors, the automatic locks of car doors would flip up and down. This was an epidemic of fires. It was an epidemic so bad that they shut off all the power to the hamlet. They eventually evacuated all the inhabitants for about 6 months. They had Italian scientists, kind of the equivalent of NASA, and the whole electrical board down there to try and work it out. They never explained this. And what's interesting is that even in the Wikipedia pseudo-skeptic community, if community is the word, they do not deny that this happened. If you look at the traffic on the internet on this, Caneto di Caronia, it happened in 2 distinct waves. They do not deny that it happened. And the very, very high electromagnetic readings, apparently, there's scorching of aubergines in the grounds and other vegetation in a very weird fashion, that they're scorched just above the surface and not below. It might be vice versa, but in a very strange way, huge readings of electromagnetic energy that scientists can't explain, lights in the sky at various points. And yeah, it happened, and it foxes everybody. I mean, you get a kind of token, guy is arrested as an arsonist. I think somebody jumped on the bandwagon later on and started hoaxing, but the original cases were completely paranormal and have got this kind of edge of something very alien hovering over the place for whatever reason we don't know.
Wow. Well, I enjoy your new obsession, Richard.
Thank you. I'm enjoying it. Makes your head hurt, I warn you. Small doses. As a doctor, I'd recommend only small doses every day. But looks like it's going to be in the news, doesn't it? Even if it's a token gesture, what comes out, it's getting people talking. We've got Obama talking, and he's one president after Reagan, after Carter, after Nixon, taking pretty serious interest in this. So, yeah, it's getting people talking.
Well, yeah, I guess that, and that I do sort of agree that if they released everything they knew at once, there would be a lot of people frightened. Like, really, I know some people say it completely sort of uproots their idea of religion, which it really shouldn't. But, so we shall see. May you live in interesting times, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's always interesting. Yeah, well, thanks. That's wonderful discussion. Thanks very much.
Thanks. And tell everybody where they can find you, Richard.
Yes, absolutely. So at Dr. Sugg, capital D, capital S on Twitter, lowercase at Dr. Richard Sugg on Instagram. And I'm putting up videos. I do my best with the rigorous time limit on Twitter, putting up videos on all my books on UFOs. And on politics some of the time on Twitter and Instagram, every day pretty much, I suppose. You can also find, if you want a much longer outing, about 40 minutes, there's a lecture I gave. If anyone can remember the good old days of actual audiences, it's a very dim, fragmentary memory now, but I had the luck to have a lovely, lovely audience in London for a fairy lecture in November 2019. So that's on YouTube. If you put in fairies and Conway Hall, it seems to be popular, and it was a lovely audience at the time. And books. Best value at the moment are fairies, Mummies, Cannibals and Vampires, and my Century books, I expect.
Yeah, look Dr. Richard Sugg up on Instagram. I cannot wait to hear the fairy talk. I can't believe I missed that.
It's good fun.
Oh, that's fantastic. All right. Richard, fascinating, informative as always. Thank you so much for coming on again.
You too.
Yeah, folks, thanks to Mike at Uno Rising Media, and happy 4th of July. We'll see you next week.